Welcome to the Journey Boldly podcast. I am Dr. Gwen. I am your host for this episode, and I'm so excited that you joined me to hear what your colleague in higher education has asked about women leading and about what's going on in the state of higher education and our responsibility to addressing injustice and our responsibility to addressing what is going on in our colleges and universities. But before I get started and share the question that's for this episode, I want to encourage you that if you have a question that you would like for me to address on this podcast, you can send your question to Dr. Gwen at journeyboldlypodcast.com or go to our website at www.journeyboldlypodcast.com, and you will remain anonymous when I share your question and the response. Okay. Also, I'd like to encourage you to comment. If you have a comment about anything that I'm sharing, about the question, about my response, or the subjects or subtopics that I bring up in my response, please share your thoughts, experiences, and ideas in the comments section so that we can start a dialogue about the topic of the episode. All right, let's get started. This question is kind of loaded. I'll just put that right out there. Even though it is asked about higher education, it could take on a broader view of society at large, but I will try and keep my responses primarily for higher education. All right, so here we go. Why do we underuse our collective power that can build educational organizations and businesses that empower under-resourced populations and challenge the status quo of institutional inequities? Okay, so that was long, that was powerful, that was loaded, as I would call it. So let me read it to you again. Why do we underuse our collective power that can build educational institutions and organizations and businesses that empower under-resourced populations and challenge the status quo of institutional inequities? Before I get started with highlighting some thoughts around that question, I want to start with the definition. And the definition is for what is central to this question of collective power. So collective power is the shared strength, influence, and capacity of a group, which consists of communities, organizations, or individuals, uniting to achieve common goals, drive social transformation, or challenge systemic injustices. It maximizes the combined knowledge, resources, and actions of participants, often centering on marginalized people to create impact beyond what is possible individually. So when you're talking about collective power, working together, pooling our resources, pooling our actions, looking at how we can come together as a group to be able to address inequities and injustices, what we can do together versus what we can do alone. Now we're talking about harnessing our collective power. And there are 4 components to harnessing this collective power. And it's solidarity and action, which is requiring active collaboration and moving from passive participation to organized collective action. Another component is transformational change, and this is used to shift power structures, influence policies, or alter social norms. So disrupting the status quo, as my colleague, Dr. Jeremy London, so adequately and eloquently talks about in her research. And then another component is shared goals. The focus is on aligning diverse participants toward a unified objective. And finally, power with is one of the components. And unlike power over, collective power emphasizes acting with others, building strength through relationships. Now, I wanted to spend some time sharing this with regard to collective power, because when we start thinking about the idea that it's underused, it makes you wonder, in what capacity are we underusing our collective power? Before we start talking about the use and underuse of collective power, I want to go back and do a little historical context. I want to talk about women who were trailblazers and pioneers, specifically in higher education. So I have two women that I want to highlight in this particular episode at this time with regard to historical context. The first is Catherine Beecher. And Catherine Beecher co-founded Hartford Female Seminary in 1823 in Connecticut, and later established the Western Female Institute in Cincinnati in 1832. In addition, in 1881, we have Sophia Packard and Harriet Giles, who were founders of the college that we know today as Spelman College. And of course, who can forget Mary McLeod Bethune, who is the founder of Bethune-Cookman University. But it didn't start out that way. She started out with the Educational and Industrial Training School for Negro Girls back in 1904. And over the years, partnering with individuals, it became Bethune-Cookman College in 1929, and in 2007, earned the title of a university. So today we have Bethune-Cookman University, started by Mary McLeod Bethune back in the early 1900s. Why do I bring up these ladies? Because they made a conscious decision that the injustice of what was happening in the educational arena for girls needed to be addressed. And so the way they chose to address it was to start a school. Now remember, everyone who starts a school is not necessarily doing this alone. Everyone who starts a movement, a school, an institution in higher education, they're not doing this alone. They're doing it with someone. And so what that means is collective power starts with an individual. And then as you step into the arena of injustice to right the wrongs, to make crooked paths straight, then you will have others who come along and support your vision. For every societal injustice, inequality, unfairness, lack of opportunity, there's always trailblazers and pioneers. That's what I call them. You might have a different term for them. Trailblazers are those who go out and create a path that does not exist, or do something that hasn't been done before but is highly, highly needed. In addition, trailblazers are the ones who take the hits. They come out of this with scrapes and scratches and cuts and bruises and hurts that other people who come along after them don't get to feel or don't have to experience. One of the reasons some people are trailblazers is because their passion or their desire for what they see, or their calling for what they see, so powerful that they're willing to cut through the noise, the naysaying, the arguments against, the challenges that come with doing something for the first time. Some terrains are difficult and some terrains are not as difficult. But either way, trailblazers are those people who are willing to go and do something for the first time to create a path for those who will follow, and to make way for those who need to see a path that they don't have at the present. Pioneers, it's kind of like where I typically fall in, are those who go early on. They saw what the trailblazers did. They saw the path. Not too many people are following it, so they're one of the first or the few, and they take that path because they have the same passion, the same calling, and they want to see the changes and opportunities for others as well. So trailblazers and pioneers are usually first. And then as they go through, there's always somebody there to encourage them, to finance their work, or to support them and promote them and ensure that the work that is being done, that they can be successful at making it happen. In thinking about women in higher education who have paved the way or become one of the first or the few, I came across this article developed by Julie Sachs, and it was found on the Keystone Higher Education News. And so even though she talked about 10, I'm going to highlight just 4 of them. The first one is Carrie Billy. And Carrie Billy is the president and CEO of the American Indian Higher Education Consortium. And she advocates for Native American students on campuses across the United States. She is of the Navajo Nation and has worked since the Clinton administration to advocate for indigenous students in the United States, specifically in the world of higher education. Another trailblazer is Dr. Stella Flores, who is a former professor at New York University who currently works as a professor of higher education at UT Austin. Dr. Flores' work has helped immigrant and minority students in the United States for years. Her insight helped reach the dissenting opinion in the U.S. Supreme Court case of Gratz versus Bollinger. Another trailblazer is Drew Gilpin Faust, who was the first woman to serve as the president of Harvard University as the 28th president, and in 2014, Forbes rated her as the 33rd most powerful woman in the world. And finally, but certainly not least, is Angela Davis. Angela Davis is a professor at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and is one of the most famous female political activists in the history of America. In 2020, she was listed as one of 100 most influential people by Time magazine. So these are just a few examples of trailblazers and pioneers who have gone on to do great things in higher education, not just bringing together people with a similar vision, but also recognizing that they were both standing on the shoulders of those who have gone before them. At the same time, they harness collective power by doing things in different places and different spaces in different times. I believe that they did 3 things simultaneously. Number 1, they stood on the shoulders of those who had come before them. Number 2, they stood in the gap so that what had been accomplished before them could still remain relevant, intentional, and to continue the legacy and trajectory of justice. And number 3, they created a path for other people to see. So when you have a first or a few, then you allow other people to say, this can be done, this has been done, and I can do it too. So collective power is the bringing together of a group to do something more than one person. But I implore you to consider this from a slightly different perspective, where collective power is when we as individuals take our calling as a passion to step out and do something that furthers the legacy and opportunities for others to come along and continue the fight against injustices. That leads me to what is my answer. And my answer is based on looking at the use or underuse of collective power through a slightly different lens. And that is to look at it from the perspective of what I just mentioned in those 3 points. Standing on the shoulders of others and continuing the legacy. We may not have a lot of people in the arena at the same time, but we cannot stay out of the arena because we don't see as many people in it as we think should be there. So in looking at what we can do ourselves is where the power truly lies, is in understanding what you are called to do and how you can show up with your courage and your bravery to do what's in your heart and what you're being called to do to address injustices. So here are my 3 thoughts around that perspective. 1, everyone is designed with a calling and a passion that's greater than they are. In other words, what you are being called to do, what you see as something that needs to happen in our society, in higher education, among students, with faculty, in leadership, in the communities, is always about more than you. And that is one of the reasons it hurts so much when you don't see it happening, because you know that there's more to this than what you're benefiting. You know that there's more to do, more help to provide, more opportunities that are needed, and you want help fulfilling your passion. Here's what I would encourage you to do. Step out and do it. Step out and do what you are calling to do. And I promise you, if you step into the arena of your calling, there is always somebody else there. And if that person is not willing to do what you're doing or make the sacrifices you're making, they might consider funding your work. They might give you support in a way that allows you to do the work that you're called to do while they just contribute and support it. An example of this is Georgia Gilmore of Montgomery, Alabama. Georgia Gilmore was a cook who funded the Montgomery bus boycott from 1955 to 1956. Her gift was cooking. So with her pies and her fried chicken and greens and cornbread and candied yams, she sold dinners and pies and took the proceeds and funded the Montgomery bus boycott. She even was visited by Dr. Martin Luther King, who also praised her for her support. Now, she didn't just give money for gas. She actually purchased vehicles. She had a job and she was doing this on the side. Of course, when it was found out that she was helping, they fired her from her job at the Woolworth. And so what she did was became a full-time entrepreneur, selling pies and dinners to fund what was going on in the civil rights movement, fighting against injustice. So, like I said, everybody has a passion and a calling for something greater than themselves. Step out and do it, and someone will be there to help you. Secondly, utilize your triple T, which is time, treasure, and talent, to advance the greater calling that you have or the injustice that you want to address. You may not have the funds, but you have the time. You may not have the time, but you have the talent. And the talent may be contributing to, organizing, answering phones, protesting. It could be anything. What you have to do is use your time, your talent, and your treasure to advance the cause that you are passionate about and to advance what you're being called to do. In thinking about this, not everybody is going to contribute the same way. So consider the possibility that someone is doing one of the T's that you can't see, but the work is somehow getting done. And as long as you're there to do what you're called to do, the work can get done. You might be the first president. You might launch an after-school program. You may launch research work so that others can read your research in order to further the cause. You might promote a scholarship. You might do training with students and faculty on how to educate in a way that brings more justice to the conversation, and people start businesses. So you may be the one who educates others so they can start organizations and businesses that bring groups together to address injustices. So don't be discouraged. The work that you're called to do is important, and you have to do it even if you don't see anyone else doing it. And where there is injustice, there will be other people to fight it, because we were not designed, I do not believe we were designed to watch others suffer and watch others miss out on opportunities. But we have to show up in the spaces and places we were sent to go. Finally, stay encouraged and keep moving. Make quitting not an option. Okay? I have always been the first or the few in a lot of situations. I've always done something that was against the status quo. I've always taken risks that other people thought I shouldn't take. But I never saw them as people who were unwilling to do the hard work. What I saw was that just wasn't their calling. And when you show up and not quit and keep going, others will show up with you too. I hope this podcast has provided you with some encouragement, some insight, some understanding, and the courage and empowerment to continue to do the things that you've called to do. Collective power is there. Underutilization, maybe. But the point is to focus on what we are supposed to do ourselves, to show up in our spaces and places, and then others will show up in those spaces with us. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Again, if you have any questions that you would like for me to cover on this podcast, please send them to Dr. Gwen at journeyboldlypodcast.com. Thank you again for listening, and remember to journey boldly.